The phrase tortured genius is maybe the laziest trope in all of journalism.
Okay.
It's the ultimate cop-out.
It absolutely is. It's a neat little box you can put someone in. It romanticizes what is, in reality, a brutal, ugly struggle.
Exactly. It makes it consumable. But the real story, the one we're looking at today, isn't about some kind of ethereal genius.
No, not at all. It's about engineering. It's about how a mind, under relentless siege from both inside and out, builds a system. Not through inspiration, but through, sheer brutal architecture.
And that's the deep dive we're taking today. We're going into the psychological profile of Daniel Lynn Bates. Not so much the creative output itself, but the meticulous system he had to build just to manage a stack of severe co-occurring diagnoses.
We're really looking at the functional architecture that allowed him to keep going.
Right. Our goal here is purely analytical. We're not speculating. We are synthesizing his actual psychological assessments, his personal diaries, his professional records.
To understand the mental framework, we're looking for the why. What were the underlying mechanics that kept him from completely collapsing when everything, his biology, his environment, was just screaming for it?
And if you've been with us for a while, you know the external story. We've covered the big events. Episode 64 went deep into that catastrophic 2025 collapse.
Yeah, the one that took him from a $171,000 career trajectory to homelessness.
And episode 67, where he buried his own album, Supernova, for what he called exhausted truth. Then E74, the whole lore around the Lost Angels and Demons album.
So the external context is there for anyone who wants it.
Exactly. But today, we're putting all that external drama to the side. We are focused strictly on the internal wiring, the psychological system that not only withstood those events, but was, you could argue, forged by them.
To really understand that architecture, you have to start with the foundation. The blueprint, if you will.
So what are we looking at in the dossier?
We're looking at a significant cluster of confirmed co-occurring conditions. This is the core mental blueprint. You've got bipolar disorder. You have full post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
And that's not all. There's also chronic depression, pervasive social anxiety.
And really pronounced avoidant personality traits. And that co-occurrence, that's the key here. It's not just a list.
No, it's a statement of perpetual internal conflict. Just think about it. A mind dealing with bipolar is already spending a massive amount of energy just managing the swings, right? The push-pull between that depressive inertia and the manic energy.
Absolutely. Now, on top of that, you layer the hypervigilance of PTSD, the flashback cycle, the constant threat assessment.
It's exhausting just to think about.
And the clinical perspective here is so important. These aren't character flaws. These are the fundamental stressors that demand these complex, high-structure coping mechanisms we're going to talk about.
So he's defined, from a clinical standpoint, by the extraordinary effort it took just to maintain a high level of functioning despite all this.
Exactly. Most people with just one of these conditions struggle to hold down a basic job. He was managing multiple professional roles and running creative businesses at the same time.
Which is mind-boggling. So how does that internal war actually play out in real time? We have this incredibly unique, unfiltered window, don't we?
We do. Excerpts from his November 2022 mental health documentation. He called it the Lithium Diary.
And this was recorded right when he was starting the medication to try and stabilize the bipolar.
What's so remarkable about it is how clinical the writing is. It's not poetry, it's self-diagnosis. It's an attempt at empirical tracking.
He's charting his mood every single day, meticulously noting if he's balanced, elevated, or, as he puts it, dipping below into the depression side.
He's also tracking his sleep patterns. He makes a distinction between waking up feeling good and the persistent issue of waking up at 2 a.m., a classic symptom.
That's classic anxiety, or the depression cycle kicking in.
Right, and that entry from Monday, November 8th, day 3.
Yeah.
Fascinating. He calls it a feeling of stability, mania goodness.
But he's quick to clarify it.
Immediately, he writes, no irritable anger or racing thoughts. Having a one-sided convo with her and knowing it's the end of us, but I never got in my feelings. Remained at peace about it.
That distinction is so critical. He's able to recognize the positive, regulated energy of what might be hypomania.
That feeling of clarity and elevated mood.
And he's actively checking it against the destructive parts of full-blown mania, the irritability, the racing thoughts.
It shows an incredible intellectual grasp of his own condition and a successful, albeit very fragile, attempt at regulating his emotions even while a relationship is ending.
But that fragility, that piece gets stress tested almost immediately, and this is where you see the systems start to fail in real time.
By Thursday, day 6, he's feeling great. He writes that he has a lot of power over my mind and thoughts, and he's riding this wave of what he calls happy euphoria.
And he sees this upcoming meeting with the woman he was trying to reconnect with as his first big test of this new stability.
And then the whole internal architecture it collapses, all because of a single external data point.
The next morning's entry is it's brutal. He documents the crash. The night was going well until he found out she had a boyfriend.
That one piece of information, the disappointment, the betrayal, the complete loss of control, it acts like a short circuit in the system.
It's that immediate textbook surge of negative emotion that the medication just hasn't had time to fully stabilize yet. The cascade is instant.
Massive disappointment, anger, hurt. But the most revealing part, I think, is the aftermath. It's how his mental health was then used against him.
Yeah. He writes that she told him, quote, "It was my bipolar."
And that is it's so deeply isolating for a mind that's already conditioned by PTSD to feel unsafe and by avoidant traits to fear shame.
To have your core struggle, the thing you're fighting so hard to manage, used as the definitive explanation for a relationship failing.
It does immense damage. It validates the deepest fear he has, that he is fundamentally broken, that all his efforts towards stability don't matter because at the end of the day, the pathology is all people will see.
So how does his mind react to that systemic betrayal from another person? The diary gives us the answer right there.
He says, my mind ran wild after that, anxiety kicked up, and I just knew depression was around the corner ready to cuddle me in the night and not let me go.
That image, depression ready to cuddle you, it's an unbelievably visceral way to describe this system failing and that involuntary swing back toward just profound inertia.
It's the recognition that the comfort of depression, as painful as it is a known state. It's predictable. Whereas connection, regulated emotion, that just proved to be volatile and unsafe.
And this is where we can sort of pivot from the clinical notes to the creative output, which really functions as its own form of documentation.
A non-linear form, for sure.
We've called his music the lyrical EKG before. It's not just art for art's sake. It's a real-time record of his internal state. So let's look at the evidence in the lyrics themselves.
Okay.
When he writes a line like, "Pain got depth no fucking x-ray could show," or "been cut from the cloth that don't heal right," what are we seeing there from a clinical perspective?
That's a textbook description of deep-seated trauma. It's an injury that's foundational. It's invisible to any kind of superficial glance, and it's resistant to standard ways of healing.
The idea that the pain has a depth that no x-ray could show is it's a perfect metaphor for the silent, non-physical weight of PTSD.
Absolutely. And then you see the bipolar contradiction captured so perfectly in lines like half on light, half on E.
And the idea that I don't know peace, I just know when it's missing.
That lack of peace.
Yeah.
That's the functional cost of the disorder. It highlights the constant psychic energy it takes to manage those two poles, the light and the E, the elevated state.
Yeah.
Stability isn't his default setting.
No, it's just a temporary break. It's measured only by the absence of chaos.
But maybe the most telling line, the one that really describes this whole psychological landscape is, my demons don't leave, they pay half the rent.
That's a heavy one.
It is. It's an incredibly sophisticated metaphor for pervasive intrusive thoughts. It suggests that these things, the trauma memories, the depression cycles, they aren't just unwelcome visitors that show up now and then.
No, they're integrated into his survival mechanism.
They are financially vested in his life, which implies he can't achieve any kind of stability, financial or creative, without, in some strange way, acknowledging and coexisting with that internal chaos. It's an unavoidable part of his mental machinery.
So if that's the chaotic foundation inside, let's look at the psychological notes that sort of explore how his worldview developed from that.
Yeah, this part is fascinating. The notes suggest he's naturally drawn to intense, complex, deep experiences, which in turn often attracts provocative or even extreme situations into his life.
It's this intended path scenario that the notes talk about. He was, quote, "intended to develop a strong sense of self and be in possession of your full power and will."
But, there's always a but, the constant irrational disruptions and unforeseen obstacles he faces systematically tests that sense of control.
Yeah.
And that leads to this profound internal conflict that really shapes everything he does.
So the core conflict is this paradox. He has this incredible strength, but it's constantly being undermined by irrational circumstances.
And that leads to fear. A fear that if he actually expresses his innate intensity, it'll be misinterpreted. It will be seen as too aggressive or out of control.
Which is the exact fear that was validated in that diary entry we just talked about.
Exactly. It's a massive repression of his own personal power, and it's driven by the trauma of both relational and systemic backlash.
So what happens when you repress that much high-frequency energy? It has to go somewhere, right?
It has to. And the
So,
notes detail where it goes into coping extremes. Instead of finding a moderate, healthy outlet, he just swings hard to the margins.
on one hand, he becomes compulsive and controlling, overly focused on material things,
Or, on the other hand, he goes to reckless extremes.
recklessness, courting danger, overindulging in food, alcohol, sex. The note suggests this isn't just self-destruction for its own sake.
No, it's a desperate attempt to feel anything real other than that deep, dull tension of his own repressed power. He needs to experience everything all the time just to make sure he still can break free from that internal prison.
It's a constant return to the edge.
And it's driven by an inability to change or solve these external situations that just seem immune to his strength or his logic. The psychological purpose of these recurring crises, according to the analysis, isn't to punish him. It's to force him to confront himself and surrender to vulnerability.
Which is the exact opposite of the hyper-controlled environment he's always trying to build.
The exact opposite.
And this whole internal struggle, the repression, the fear of showing his power, it translates directly into his external philosophy, this idea of resistance against the beast.
His core philosophy is a clinical reaction to his lived experience. It's not just some cool idea he had. He perceives the world as the beast or the program, a heavy, inhuman system of corporations, media, and image.
And that philosophical foundation is critical because it justifies the chaos he feels inside. The world is the enemy, so his internal system has to be a defense mechanism.
Right. And his identification with the biblical Daniel, surviving the lion's den through integrity. It positions his whole struggle, personal and creative, as a form of spiritual warfare.
He's fighting against what he sees as a soulless marketplace, so his art can't just be a luxury. It has to be a political and spiritual act of record-keeping.
Which brings us right to his core creative tenet, the truth-fluent mandate.
Art has to function purely as documentation and record-keeping, not entertainment.
And if your goal is to fight the beast, your only weapon is the unvarnished truth.
You see this mandate directly in his methods. We know he's very explicit about leaving in the breaths, the stumbles, the raw emotional artifacts in his final vocal takes.
He prioritizes that raw authenticity over any kind of technical perfection. He has this belief that real life doesn't get edited.
And the clinical connection there is so clear. For a mind dealing with intense trauma and avoidance, creating a perfect, polished narrative, it would feel like a betrayal of the truth. It would feel like an exercise in repression.
So by leaving the raw stuff in, he's providing irrefutable, unedited evidence of his current state. He's building an affidavit of his suffering and his survival. And that method is the bridge that leads us right to his persona system.
Okay, so let's get into the structural core of this survival mechanism, the persona system. And we have to be really clear here. This is not a creative gimmick. It's not a brand identity.
No, the multiple identities are a necessary coping mechanism for psychological compartmentalization. It's a method for, as he puts it, surviving in functions, especially when the core self is just compromised by all those diagnoses.
Think of it like specialized survival gear. You can't send your raw, traumatized emotional self into a bureaucratic fight with the bank or the court system.
You need different tools for different environments. It's just practical.
So the primary identity, the foundation that's mostly unseen, is Daniel Bates, the ghost. This is the functional entity.
He's the legal name on the documents, the compliant employee, the one who has to carry all the administrative weight of living in a world he sees as hostile.
The ghost is the one who endures all the systemic consequences. The employment, the bankruptcy, the legal proceedings, the housing instability. His whole function is to provide foundational stability and compliance.
He has to maintain the illusion of being a normal, functioning adult, even when the bipolar cycles are spiking or the PTSD is flaring up.
And he has to be unseen, a ghost, because for him, exposure means vulnerability to the very system he's fighting against.
Then you have the second persona, DLB, the armor.
So if the ghost is the motherboard taking all the administrative hits, the armor is the processing unit that translates that pain into output.
Exactly. This is the raw musical voice, the emotional outlet that documents the trauma.
The armor serves as a protective shield because it externalizes all those visceral truths. We mentioned his album Mercy is for the Weak. That's a direct, unfiltered chronicle of a destructive relationship.
The act of creating, of recording that pain, prevents the trauma from completely consuming the ghost. The armor lets him say the difficult, ugly, true things that the compliant Daniel Bates just can't afford to say in a professional setting.
But the system needs a third piece, doesn't it? Dante East, the escape.
The escape is crucial. This persona is a compartment for expression that is aesthetically and thematically totally separate from the grit and trauma of DLB the armor.
It's vital for managing his high openness trait. It channels his curiosity and unconventional creativity into things like film and fashion, the expensive heart or loyalty dreams creatives ventures.
And we have the professional proof of this compartmentalization. Things like that email invitation for him to be a Western influence creative consultant for HYBE Corporation.
Or the Universal Music Group royalty statements that are tied to different projects under different names.
This separation protects the escape from the pain that the armor carries. And, critically, it protects the ghost from the public. Raw exposure that the armor requires.
If Daniel Bates, the 9-to-5 employee, was releasing music as raw as DLB, he couldn't maintain that hyper-compliance he needs to survive.
So this complex structure ensures that his high vocational interest in artistic endeavors, and we'll get to the assessments in a minute, doesn't destabilize his financial and legal reality, which is all managed by the ghost. The personas aren't optional.
No, they're the structured way he manages his entire psychological risk profile.
So let's talk about the massive dissonance that the records reveal, because the common public perception is of this unstable artist who's driven by chaotic bipolar energy.
Right. But the records of Daniel Bates, the ghost persona, they tell a completely different story about his professional life.
The data is just. It's undeniable. We're looking at over a decade of consistent, conventional professional history in jobs that require intense organization and reliability.
Warehouse supervisor, inventory coordinator, luxury suite attendant, bartender. I mean, he was often holding 2 full-time jobs at the same time for over 10 years.
He wasn't just surviving in those systems. He was objectively succeeding within the very system he philosophically calls the beast.
He got a Logistics Rising Star Award, a Hero Award. His own independent assessments confirm a proficient work style for reliability and integrity.
So the internal chaos was extreme, but the external professional conduct was meticulously structured and reliable.
How do you square that circle?
This is a classic manifestation of trauma-forged compliance and hyper-responsibility.
Explain that.
Because the underlying PTSD logic tells him that the world is fundamentally unsafe and systems will always fail him, his defense is to become indispensable, to become hyper-compliant, to preemptively eliminate any possible reason for rejection or failure.
We see these extreme examples of this in the legal and work files. That time he was severely ill with COVID.
Right, confirmed positive test, an ER visit.
And his immediate priority was contacting his probation officer to explain why he couldn't recalibrate his interlock device. He was physically collapsing, but the trauma logic mandate,
Do not fail the system.
it overrode all his physical needs.
And this compulsive obedience leads to one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the whole dossier.
Yeah.
His pay stubs.
Yeah, this part is just, it's hard to process. We analyzed records showing his take-home pay was literally $0.00.
He was working full-time, sometimes 60 or 70 hours a week, and the net income was zero because of healthcare, taxes, child support, all the deductions.
That's not just a financial struggle. That is economic starvation disguised as employment. What does that say about the psychological driver that makes someone keep working diligently day after day for literally no money?
It highlights the absolute victory of the trauma logic mandate over rational self-interest. The compulsion to meet every single obligation, even when payment is mathematically impossible, is a desperate mechanism to stave off the shame and the systemic hostility that the ghost persona is designed to endure.
He refuses to quit, because quitting would validate the external perception of instability, and it would reinforce the trauma of being abandoned by the system all over again.
And this profound contradiction is perfectly encapsulated in his vocational assessments, his Journey Front Interest Report. The scores are wild.
Exceptionally high scores across 3 areas that you would think are completely disparate.
Right.
Artistic, 5.0, realistic, 5.0, and conventional, 4.8.
That specific combination is extremely rare.
Right. The artistic score gives him the creative vision. The realistic score gives him the mechanical skill, the hands-on ability to execute. And the conventional score gives him the meticulous organization and compliance for the bureaucracy.
So he's a visionary creative director who can also manage the logistics of a major warehouse and meticulously track all the paperwork. It explains how he could be a warehouse supervisor while actively managing his creative companies.
He can bridge creative chaos with real-world execution.
But the paradox just gets deeper when you look at his values report. When the assessment asks what drives him, he scores incredibly low on the traits we'd associate with a creativepreneur.
Incredibly low. Autonomy 2.0, financial increase 2.0, and ambition 2.3.
So wait, if the drive isn't for autonomy or wealth or ambition, the three things that seem to power his creative ventures, then why the relentless hustle?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because the hustle isn't an aspirational goal, it's a defensive reflex. The engine driving the ghost in the armor is the need for his actual top values, stability 3.8 and growth 3.8.
So all of it, the creative output, the compliance, the multiple jobs, it's all just a mechanism designed purely to get foundational safety and to keep learning.
Those are the desperate needs of a mind conditioned by bipolar, PTSD, and systemic betrayal.
So the external hyper-ambitious persona you see on his LinkedIn, the visionary, investor, creatorepreneur, that's a survival strategy.
It's a required performance to meet the very modest internal goal of achieving stability, not the egotistical goal of massive wealth or control. The assessment confirms it. The drive is rooted in fear and insecurity, not raw ego.
The analysis in the assessment essentially says that prioritizing financial increase for him comes from a place of fear. The relentless work is his attempt to build a buffer against a system that has repeatedly shown it's willing to starve him, no matter how hard he works.
Precisely. Which connects all of these components and brings us to the definitive systemic stress test.
Yeah.
The 2025 collapse.
If the whole persona system was built for survival, then that rapid cascade that led to homelessness was the ultimate proof of how interconnected and how profoundly fragile that system really was.
The cascade started with the catastrophic failure of Daniel Bates, the ghost. He lost his job, his car was seized, his housing was destroyed in a fire. It was external system negligence, legal violations. The world just successfully destroyed the ghost's administrative foundation.
And the domino effect was instantaneous. The failure of the ghost led directly to the operational paralysis and creative shutdown of DLB, the armor.
He had to cancel major album releases. He couldn't process the trauma musically because he was too busy trying to perform the administrative labor of just surviving day to day.
The clinical conclusion from that is stark, and it's simple.
The armor cannot function when the ghost is critically compromised. The entire psychological survival system depends on the delicate balance of the whole structure. When you eradicate the foundational stability, the public-facing, raw creative self is rendered inert.
So the collapse, when you look at it through this lens, it was a failure of system support. It wasn't just a spontaneous mental breakdown.
And crucially, this systemic failure perfectly reinforces his pre-existing PTSD logic, the betrayal by the legal system, by his employers. It just confirms his deepest conditioned fear. You only survive by your own design, and you can only trust yourself.
That trauma logic immediately mandates hypervigilance and radical self-reliance.
And then you layer his avoidant personality traits on top of that. The coping mechanism isn't to ask for help. The avoidant mind sees that as a form of humiliating exposure, a confirmation of inadequacy.
Instead, he defaults to extreme output and work.
The ultimate proof of that is in the data from that exact time. Even while he was navigating active homelessness and the legal mess from the fire, what's the first thing he does?
He gets a job as a freight handler at Capstone Logistics in February 2025.
He's programmed to prioritize labor over vulnerability. The internal monologue is crystal clear. If I am producing value, I am necessary. If I am necessary, I cannot be abandoned. He chose physical exhaustion and danger carrying freight over the emotional risk of asking for help or admitting defeat.
That constant frantic motion is the avoidant brain's way of managing profound shame and isolation.
This whole case study, then, is a portrait of a mind that's profoundly over-adapted to hostility. It's a psychological profile forged in fire. And it's driven not by a desire for celebrity or wealth, but by resilience and a compulsion toward truth documentation.
He survived conditions that, according to all the documents, should have led to a complete emotional and physical breakdown.
And this is where we need to ground the analysis back in the human element. For a man who is defined by radical self-reliance and avoidant traits, his documented acts of community support are often just overlooked.
We have that email from September 2025. This is when he himself was displaced. And Daniel Bates, the ghost, is meticulously requesting emergency housing assistance for someone else, for Bruce Nutter, a retired Dallas resident on disability displaced by fire.
That's the compromised, exposed ghost still prioritizing the administrative labor of securing stability for someone else. It's the ultimate act of hyper-responsibility, even when his own foundation is completely crumbled.
And the recent update provides this necessary anchor back to the system's purpose. Bruce Nutter called Daniel to thank him. He found a new, stable place in Balch Springs.
And that small, quiet moment of triumph, the ghost helping another ghost find solid ground, that's the purest articulation of the underlying desire for stability that drives his entire complex architecture.
So we circle all the way back to the core question this whole profile raises. He created this system where the conventional stability of Daniel Bates the Ghost is necessary for the raw, documentary function of DLB the Armor.
Right. But that ghost has to operate inside the very system, the beast, that is actively trying to destroy the armor's truth.
So if the relentless pursuit of ultimate, unfiltered creative freedom requires the eventual destruction of your conventional stability of the ghost who clocks in and out, is that a price worth paying?
Or is the architecture of the world just designed so that one side must inevitably devour the other? Can the two ever actually coexist peacefully?
That's the psychological friction at the very heart of the battle-tested mind. It's a compelling thought to consider. Whether true creative freedom is a luxury that requires financial instability, or if instability is just the unavoidable byproduct of refusing to compromise the truth. Something for you to mull over.
And before we sign off, we have to include our mandatory disclaimer.
The Deep Dive, a podcast, and Neon Core Media have no ownership or official connection to DLB, V2V by D-Bates, Orison Holdings, 11SIX Music, Neon Vision Studios, or any associated entities. This analysis is purely an independent analytical deep dive into the provided material.
We appreciate you joining us for this extensive look inside the internal architecture, and we will catch you next time.